Hi everyone, and welcome back to Rough Rider, where every week I talk writing, self-publishing, and living in a barely literate society. So maybe you've had an idea in your head for a while, and now you want to turn it into a book. Starting a novel can be intimidating for a first-time author, but there are a few basic first steps you could take towards getting started with your first novel, and I'm going to lay them out for you here. So the first thing you should do is work out your original idea. Something must have popped into your head that made you want to write a book in the first place. And it could be anything. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could just be an interesting situation, an interesting character. Anything could be the core idea of your story. So what you should do is you should write that down and start expanding it. And it doesn't have to be organized yet. It's totally fine if it's messy and kind of all over the place. You should just write down everything that comes to mind when you think about that idea. So if you want like an example, let's say we're working with, I don't know, the premise is that humans have cloned Neanderthals for the first time. So when you think about an event like that, that raises a whole bunch of questions. One of the first things I think of is, can the Neanderthals speak? And if they can speak, then can they ask for rights? And if they did ask for rights, then how's society going to react to that? So for that example, that's sort of like a plot idea. So if you had an idea for a plot or, a storyline, then I would consider what led up to the event, what its results would be, and then how it might be stopped. If your initial idea was a character, then you should ask yourself, where did they come from? What kind of situations might they get themselves into? And what's this person's goals in life? The answers to all these questions are going to guide you as you continue to invent and incorporate more details into your story. Now, the next thing you should do is ask yourself, is my idea plot-driven or character-driven? This is an important thing to ask yourself. It's going to determine what you need to focus on when you're planning out your novel. So take a look at your expanded premise, all your notes that you wrote out, which is probably going to be a mess, and then decide if the primary driver for this story is the plot or its characters. You need both to write a good story, but one's going to take priority over the other in the planning phase at least. So for some personal examples, my sci-fi novel, The Aetherverse, it's a big space opera, so it's a plot-driven novel. The characters are just kind of players in a larger scheme. It's the events of the novel that get my point across. So the characters could be replaced with an entirely new set of characters, and it really wouldn't change the events of the plot. A galactic conspiracy can happen regardless of who's trying to stop it. On the other hand, my general fiction novel, Devils in Sunday Hats, is character-driven. So the plot's entirely dependent on the characters. This story wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for them. You can't have a story about a son's relationship with his alcoholic mother without the son and his alcoholic mother. If these characters were anyone else, then the story wouldn't even happen. But anyway, once you know the driving element of your story, you can focus on that at the beginning. And then where you go next depends on whether or not your idea is plot-driven or character-driven. So my next set of advice is for plot-driven stories. I find that for plot-driven stories, it's helpful to start at the end and then work backward. I just think it's easier to come up with a series of events if you already know what they're leading to. So if we go back to our Neanderthal cloning example, the ending could be the achievement of legal personhood by the Neanderthal clones. So we have to think about what events are going to have to happen to accomplish this, and what kind of obstacles are people going to face along the way. So just some ideas. Maybe you would need some sort of like dramatic congressional hearing or something where they're talking about legal rights for clones, or you have some sort of, I don't know, like civil rights march for the sake of the Neanderthal clones. We could call it hominid rights or something like that. The next step would be to take all of these events that you come up with and arrange them in a logical sequence. And after you've done that, you have a pretty good idea of the plot. You know where it's going to go. So what you should start thinking about is the characters. Because the plot is the primary driver, you should really think about how these events are going to affect the characters. Also think about what roles you're going to need to fill to kind of move the story along. For our cloning example, you would probably want to have the first Neanderthal clone as the character, if not the main character. You can have the woman who volunteered to be a surrogate for the clone, and you can have various public figures who might be involved in the controversy. Really, you're creating a cast of characters to act out the plot, not a plot to demonstrate the characters. But I have a separate set of advice if your story is character-driven. I would say you should just start with coming up with the characters themselves. Come up with some interesting personalities and figure out how they might interact with each other in a way that's entertaining to watch. Think about internal changes they might undergo, something that's really going to captivate people, make them sympathize with them and think, oh wow, like what a transformation. And then also consider the characters' end games. Like, what do they want? Like, what are they going for? What do they personally want to have done by the time your book's over? So let's say for the cloning example, we're not focusing on the big picture. We're just gonna focus our attention on the experience of that first Neanderthal clone. So what would he be like? What kind of conflicts is he gonna have? Like internally with his own identity, or externally with humans who may not be so understanding of him? What's his relationship gonna be like with humans, especially the surrogate who carried him? What's he gonna want from the life that he's been given? And then what is he gonna have to do to get it? This is where character profiles become really helpful. It's a good thing to do in the planning phase. You list out everything you need to know about the characters, and then you use this as a reference while you're writing. I've made some related videos about this in the past, so I'll put links to those in the description. But once you have your cast of characters, it's time to start thinking about the greater plot. What events are gonna have to take place to make your characters, shine? Like, to have people look at them and be like, oh wow, this is a character in action. Neanderthal clone, what would his motivations be? If his main motivation is to be viewed as human, then you could accomplish this through some sort of dramatic, publicized speech. He speaks in front of a whole room of journalists saying, like, respect me, I am just as worthy of personhood as the rest of you are. Also consider what changes you want the characters to undergo and what events might trigger those changes within them. So let's say there's some politician who's like fiercely against hominid rights. He's like, they're not human, like they're some sort of abomination. God wiped them out and now we're defying God's will for bringing them back. What might have to happen to change this guy's mind about this? He makes a total 180 and by the end he's like, oh, I support fully their rights. What made him start thinking that way? Because he didn't just change his mind for nothing. So ultimately, since you're focusing on the characters, the plot is there to showcase your characters. The events are not going to occur without them. So now that you've taken those steps, whether your story is plot driven or character driven, the next thing you should do is just bring it all together. Take the plot and the characters and figure out how you're going to have them all fit together in your book. It doesn't matter which one you started with or prioritize, because you're going to have to combine them eventually. You really can't have a novel without both. So just start connecting the dots. I find that having a Word document is really helpful. I always use that file as a guide. I include like a synopsis, kind of going through what the story's about and what happens. I'll usually put an outline in there. I'll include all of my character profiles and then any sort of maybe terms that are unique to the book that I may have invented that are useful to know. There's probably other ways to organize it, but that's just how I always do it. But anyway, use a file like that as a guide, or organize your stuff however you want to. So then think about the themes of your book, what kind of messages you want to get across, and how you can use your characters to do it. Consider the individual subplots and where you might want them to converge or diverge. You should do this based on, honestly, what's useful and what is helpful for you to move the plot along. And then by now, you've built up a strong enough foundation that you can start writing confidently. I will say though that if you're a procrastinator like me, you may end up wasting time focusing on the background and really building everything up until you're like, oh yeah, I'm ready. You're never really going to be ready like that. You're just gonna have to start writing it at some point. Don't delay yourself for the sake of creating some kind of perfect foundation, because it's never gonna be perfect. Now, all that being said, I do have some opinions to give. I don't really think there's one right way to write a novel. I gave a basic guide just now with some steps you can take, but in the end, I really don't think that the process of writing a novel can be broken down into a series of concrete steps like that, like it's some sort of formula for writing a book. Like, I tried to simplify things here, but your experience is not going to be so clean cut. It's going to be messy. You're going to have to make lots of revisions when you realize that you've contradicted yourself, or you really need to change something that you didn't plan out that well. Your story is probably going to take on a life of its own, and by the end, it might not even resemble your original idea anymore, and that's okay. You should let this go organically. If the story evolves, it evolves. Don't stick with your original idea if it just kind of naturally drifts into something else, because I would say that that's just, it's better. Like, it wouldn't have changed if it wasn't a better idea. If your original idea was so perfect, then you really would have just stuck with it. Subconsciously, you wouldn't have started drifting away. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of an idea of how you can get started. I know it's intimidating to start writing a first novel. A lot of people say that they want to do it, but they just don't know where to even begin. If you're watching this and you have written a novel before and you have any input on how a first-time author can get started, please put a comment about that. I'd be interested in what you have to say. To be honest, I never really thought about my own writing process until I tried making this video. My friend wants to start writing a book and she was asking me about it, and I was like, I don't know, you just do it. Like I don't have any advice. So it really took me a lot of effort to try to think about what it is I'm doing, and because I do most of it without thinking. Like I'm not doing it consciously. So this is the best I could do here. But if you have your own ideas that have worked for you, please put it in the comments. So if you want to read more about this, I do have a blog post as usual. You can find the link for that in the description. And if you find it interesting or helpful, please like and subscribe, follow me on social media, and as always, thank you for watching. God bless.